following video is classified as M. It contains low-level coarse language. LJ Operations recommends viewing by a mature audience. It's 4:30, good afternoon and welcome to LJ News. Ellen Bathgate had never had a black eye before she was punched in the face in her own office. The 38-year-old experienced her first and only black eye while working as a real estate agent and is one of a growing number of agents speaking out about the horrific conditions they are working under. The real estate world is now classified as high risk after the Victorian Coroner's office found out that the annual suicide rate within the industry was 13 per 100,000 people. Ms. Bathgate, who has worked in the industry for 17 years, isn't surprised by the shocking statistics. She describes a culture of non-stop work, racking up over 60 hours a week and being on call 24/7, while also experiencing violence on the job. The Sydneysider was assaulted on the job after having a tenant evicted who was 3 months behind in rent. She then had to obtain a garnishee order for $10,000 in unpaid rent to be recovered, where $300 was taken directly from the tenant's bank account. The tenant came into the office to express her displeasure at having every cent in her bank account taken to start to pay off the debt, and she was really upset, she told news.com.au. I didn't have any de-escalation training on how to de-escalate the situation, and she ended up at the very end of the intense conversation standing up and announcing the only way she could have somewhere to sleep at night was to be locked up in jail. While the 38-year-old said she was surprisingly calm after the terrifying incident, it wasn't until weeks later she realized how much it had impacted on her life. Living in a small town at the time meant she couldn't avoid the woman, and if she ever saw her, she would end up triggered, experiencing the shakes and feeling unsafe. The Voice of the Property Manager 2021 report released by MRI Software in February 2022 showed 60% of Australian property managers found dealing with aggressive and abusive owners and tenants as their biggest challenge. It showed 53% were struggling with mental health and almost 1 in 4 intended to leave the industry altogether, twice the number recorded in the inaugural 2018 report. Antonia Mercorella, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, said property managers had been front and centre during the COVID eviction moratorium, ongoing rental reviews and reforms, and the recent flooding disaster. It has been an unrelenting onslaught of challenge after challenge for property managers over the past couple of years, and this mounting pressure is understandably taking an emotional toll. It's little wonder that we have seen a wave of resignations among this sector, Ms. McCorrella said. We've heard concerning reports of property managers regularly encountering verbal abuse and, in some cases, even being physically assaulted while simply doing their job. Another time, Miss Bathgate felt threatened by a tenant during an inspection when she talked about the need to maintain the garden. He came uncomfortably close, towering over her and demanding she delete the photos she had taken. I felt incredibly threatened and complied and deleted them straight away, as I wasn't sure what would happen next. The garden was much less important than my physical safety, she said. We had a few phone calls following it, and he was incredibly agitated by every phone call, so anytime I went back to the property to perform the inspection, even if he said he wouldn't be home, I brought another person with me as I didn't feel safe. Surprisingly, it wasn't these incidents that caused Miss Bathgate's depression, but the insane workload agents are expected to take on the industry. She had dreamt of being an agent ever since she was 12 and wanted to make an impact on lives after being blown away by the care shown by the person who sold her parents their first home. But the reality of the job was heartbreaking. After being made a department manager at just 21, where she was in charge of 7 people who were looking after between 800 and 1,000 properties, Miss Bathgate said things really came unstuck. That is when I realised I did not have a time in a day to get everything done that needed to be done, and that's when things started to unravel for the first time, she said. I would say that in that particular role, I experienced what I would call burnout. It was while I was in that role, I was diagnosed with depression and received treatment for depression. And I just remember being exhausted and just feeling like I'm never going to get on top of my to-do list. Recent research found that 65% of real estate professionals suffer from poor mental health, according to Domain. It actually saw Miss Bathgate leave the industry for 3 years to run a beauty business, but she later returned to property management. She was then diagnosed with anxiety in her early 30s, which she still deals with today. It meant every time the phone rang, my heart would race. Every time a new mail would come into my inbox, my heart would race. She said, she explained, I would feel a sense of dread as I wasn't quite sure what catastrophe I was going to have to deal with or whether I was going to cop an earful of abuse or something going wrong at the property. Ms. Bathgate said the industry overall has been terrible with dealing with mental health issues brought on by the job alongside overwhelming workloads. Because we are dealing with landlords' biggest investments and tenants' homes, the place they live in, almost everything feels like it should be treated with absolute urgency as an industry, she said. But as an industry, we have done a terrible job creating boundaries about being at home and not allowing our phones to ring all through the night or responding to messages all through the night. In an attempt to provide a decent service, we made ourselves available 24/7, and it's done pretty terrible things to people's mental health. She added that she feels regret about not creating a better work or life balance, particularly as her dad is now terminally ill. 10 years ago, he wasn't terminally ill and had much more available time that I could have spent with him instead of spending it working, she said. I feel like it had a pretty big impact on that time you never get back. When Andy Reid moved from running bars and restaurants into a real estate, he was on a high when he sold 3 houses in the first week, but he said things got difficult and the industry later broke him. When you go from initially being a general manager in hospo, where everyone wants to be your mate, and to a real estate agent where people actively cross the road to avoid you because of what you do, I find that really hard, he said. It's a real culture shock for people to come into an industry that has this sort of stigma. Even though every industry has its good and bad, it's very public with real estate. The 38-year-old admits he thought the industry wasn't for him, but found it hard to leave when he was financially doing well. You can find yourself trapped in golden handcuff, and it sets expectations from a lifestyle point of view at a certain level. But it's not all rosy all the time, he said. Explained. It can impact you a hell of a lot, as there are high emotions that come with real estate transactions, particularly in sales and with property management. It's basically a thankless job, where you have tenants blaming you and also landlords blaming you, but you are expected to deal with everyone's problems. The award-winning auctioneer added on the sales side, there is a lot of pressure to sell a certain amount of properties, otherwise your job can be in question. While the impact of COVID had hit property managers hard. Many property managers are at breaking point because of scale pressure with rent relief schemes and moratoriums, and you've got landlords going broke and tenants going broke, and they're looking at a property manager who isn't equipped to give them answers to try and bail them out of life-changing situations, he said. The Melbourne man revealed that even when he changed roles, auctions became a place of escapism for him, but as soon as he got back into his car, the weight of life dumped back on him and he would burst into tears. It resulted in him being diagnosed with acute depressive anxiety in 2015. Mr. Reid's struggles with his mental health led him to become an ambassador for 100 Words, a men's mental health charity that encourages his men to share their pain, be vulnerable, and ultimately avoid suicide. He is also calling for a serious change to the culture of the industry, particularly the focus that making money is the only measure of success. The stereotypical perception of the real estate profession is a shiny car and flashy suit and millions of dollars, and it's not a consumer fault, as at the end of the day, we put some of these fucking wankers on a pedestal and put them up as a model of success, he said. When the reality is this 1% of the working population, but the majority of that population have got into real estate to help and will not say anything about the money. Unfortunately, the picture of success both internally and externally has created this bullshit scenario where a lot of agents think they need to keep up appearances. They need to fake it, but the pressure that puts on new agents or new professionals to fake how well they are doing, as they can't be vulnerable, is so toxic.